Hi, welcome to today's DILAX Lab. I'm very happy to welcome here to today's session, which is about train stations reimagined. The DILAX Lab we put in place to give something back to our customers or potential customers, to give some insights from the industries where we are present. So that means in the retail sector, in the station sector, in the public mobility sector. Because we not only provide data and gather data through our sensors that we produce in-house, but we evaluate it also. And we have a mission which is called Local Data for Better Cities. And with this in mind, I want to introduce today our first guest and then our second guest, because we're three today. Our first guest is Alice Lunardon. She's an architect and PhD student, and she's parallelly working as a business development manager at EIT Urban Mobility. This is an European agency working around mobility and public spaces, and Alice is doing some research on it, and I'm very eager and keen on hearing what she is working on the design and rethinking of the use of train stations. We all know these landmark stations that we have in mind. So, for example, the Gare de Lyon in Paris, the Centrale Station in Antwerpen, the main station in Frankfurt, for example, and so on and so on. There are many landmarks that we already know, but they are from another century. And they have changed also over the time. They developed, the purpose has changed. And we want to know today how to imagine the station of the future, what can we expect, and what has already been done in some projects, and what can we also expect for other stations to come. And so then my question then in this talk today with Alice and my colleague Romina will be what the perfect station could look like in the future. We will learn all of this from you, Alice, so very welcome to have you here in our DILAX lab today.
Thank you.
And I'm also happy to greet and welcome my colleague Romina. Romina Lecherbauer is a sales manager for several markets, so not only geographically for Europe, so for Spain and Portugal, but also for Latin America. And she's dealing with the public mobility industry as well as the stationary sector, so retail, shopping center and railway station. So you are here today as an expert because you have had many customer talks where this topic was also one of the top priorities, to gather data, how to work with data, and how to work with data also in the train station. So very welcome, Romina.
My pleasure.
Then I would like to start with the conversation. So, Alice, so just to begin with, how would you describe the role of this train station today, and what can we imagine for the future of the train station? What are you working on currently?
Hi, so thank you, Julia. Just a little bit of story about this, because it's important to mention that train stations in the mid-19th century, they became a key. The railway industry became a key mode of transport in Europe, and stations were constructed in cities, and they modified the urban landscape of cities. And they were compared, let's say, to cathedrals, because of course people used them a lot. They were like a gate to the city, like urban elements combining mobility and centrality. So they were very alive, let's say, and very important in the city. Then what happened in the 20th century after the wars? the railway industry declined, let's say, due to the increasingly car-based society. So the stations lose their function and centrality in the city, and they just became a point of transit, a departure and arrival point, which they still are more or less in cities. Then in the last decade of the 1990s, the 20th century, what happened is that stations and their surroundings have been completely replanned and reconstructed, especially in big cities. This led to property booms. It raised the value of the lands around the stations and also, inside the station. And that was because in these neighbors, they were constructed a lot of offices and implemented new services and other kind of buildings. So new, business areas were constructed, and it led to the property booms. And of course, railway companies that were privatized, let's say, of course, it's different aspects in Europe, but they could rent the spaces, and they can rent the spaces to a very high price, inside the station. So in this context, let's say multifunctionality were encouraged for these areas and outside and inside the stations, but urban planners were not really involved in the decision making of, for example, which kind of services should be implemented, especially inside the stations, because they are part of the railways and they are owned from railway companies and then rent to retailers. So the consequence was that big firms can pay the rent of these spaces and be implemented there, whereas local retailers, smaller companies cannot do this. So they became like big commercial mall and departure and arrival point into the city. But what is missing, at least from my point of view, is the integration of other kind of services that can serve the citizens and the users in their daily life. Also, the integration of other green mobility modes in combination with public transport, to let them become like a hub of mobility, not just trains, buses, and public transport, but also, for example, sharing mobility or micro-mobility, electric devices, and everything that people are really using now. So, of course, you can see in Europe some example of this integration, but it's not systematically done so far. And I think that that can be an opportunity, also a business opportunity for the station to integrate these services, services linked to mobility, but also other kind of services, like, for example, kindergartens to facilitate the commuting of people that have kids, instead of going by car, drop off the kids and then go to take the train. If you have a kindergarten in the station, they can commute fastly and quickly. And also, of course, then it depends on the context of the city and the places, but I don't know, co-working spaces or gym or medical centers, I don't know, whatever can serve the citizens in their daily life while they commute, so they can have a more efficient management of their time during their day. And so linking back to multifunctionality, I would say that more situation-specific commitment to multifunctionality would be needed. And if thinking about these services, we can say that this can enable the concepts of a 15-minute city, for example, where the station can act like a neighbor and people can walk, in a radius of 15 minutes to reach out to the services and the mobility they need. Also, there is another aspect that I'm looking at in my research, is that the station is the only industrial plant left into the cities. You have a lot of flows of energy, materials, people, wastes, and a lot of things going through the station every day. So we maybe should exploit these flows, like energy, for example, and use it for optimize the production and consumption of energy for the public transport, but also for the urban mobility, instead of using the network. No? So we can imagine to produce the energy at the station and then fuel the electric mobility that departs from the station. So that's the image of the future station.
It's a very broad image already. Thank you, Alice, for this very global overview of what we can do. So to summarize, there is so much more potential in the train stations than what we are using so far. For instance, to include more services in it, to make more of a hub for the citizens walking or living nearby or coming to the train stations. Yes, I see, and I totally agree. And we see already a change in the stations of today. And as you were saying, the change that has happened so far was a lot towards another shopping mall or a marketplace, and yes, there are a lot of things which are then which need then to be measured if it is even used by the consumers. And you are working with the stations as well as the cities, so what changes do they want? What are they're striving for? So besides the approaches that you were already mentioning.
So let's say in the last 5-6 years, I've been working with different companies, railway companies, and the city authorities, city institutions, on projects that concern stations or their surroundings. And both need to improve the use of the station. Of course, better exploit the station as multimodal hubs because multimodality is important to reach sustainable cities, and face the climate crisis.
What do you mean with multimodal hubs? Do you mean in terms of public transport, or do you mean something different with that?
Yes, the combination of public transport with sharing mobility, electric mobility, micromobility, to avoid the use of car. So if you have fleet journey done with more greener modes of transport, you can avoid the use of car. So let's say they both have as an objective to transform the stations into multimodal hubs, to enhance intermodality, of course. But then, let's say they have different modes of working and collaboration, and cities are more oriented to the society, the inclusiveness, and the sustainability of transport, of course, in a general manner, whereas railway company, they still need to think about the revenues they want to make with the station. They need to make with the station because actually they then pay the maintenance of the station with these revenues. So that's a balance that's important to keep for stations. So they are not really into looking to other kind of services. They have to rent the spaces and get some revenues, and then can use it for the maintenance of stations. refurbishment and works and everything. And today, what I can say, it's there is not a real, let's say, collaboration between the two companies and the city authorities. Of course, there are a lot of interesting best practices about this, especially in Germany. But there is something that is starting now, because they understand that they have a common objective. So what I'm doing now, for instance, in my job, is working with two cities that want to, transform the stations into multimodal hubs. And we are testing some solutions of micromobility together with the public transport, this combination, and we will see if it works and if it's used and if it really can help citizens to avoid the use of car. And I think that also to enable this collaboration between the two authorities, institutions and railway companies, it's important to demonstrate them that it works, so making tests. And of course, we will evaluate the impact and collect a lot of data about this test and see if it works and how it can be replicated.
So the decisions are made on the data you gain, I would imagine. And I can also imagine that there are a lot of stakeholders that you are then dealing with. You were mentioning that the commercial goal is still there. So how do you mediate between their needs and perspectives and goals?
I mean, that's the most difficult task, right? Because
I guess so.
Negotiating and mediating when you have different interests. And of course, economic interest is not easy, no? So again, I think that through the demonstration of the effectiveness of these tests and then, the successful implementation of new solutions for mobility and integration into the station as a mobility hub can help this collaboration. But yes, as said before, what is missing then is data to then demonstrate this, right? So if we had data, for example, of what the citizens and the users would need during their commuting time, and journey, maybe, these authorities can be convinced to install to implement kind of services that are not there now. So that's the most important part, I think. And it would be also useful to let them collaborate more if they have data, reliable data, and then they can create a common vision and objective and work together on this.
Do you have already approaches how to gather this data?
What we can do, what we will do in these projects, for example, is the observation during the tests and analysis. So for now it's like, this kind of observation and analysis, interviews, questionnaires.
Quantitative and qualitative data.
Exactly.
That you get.
Yes.
All right. Romina, you also know a thing or two about the relationship of public transport companies. How do you see the relationship between the public authorities and the train stations and how they collaborate together?
Well, it may differ from country to country, but as I've seen in general, the transport operators are not the ones managing the train stations. Mm-hmm. And there are cases where you have these public business entities that manage only railways and stations, and you have another public entity that manages only the rolling stock. And in addition to that, you have the retailers that rent the spaces in these stations. So it absolutely has a mix of different worlds with different interests, as Alice said, and also even different languages. So from one side, you could have one transport operator that have data about their vehicle load or their punctuality, but as soon as that passenger commutes in this station, that data is kind of lost. You don't know how it moves within this station, which type of services do they use, how often do they come back. So it also doesn't allow this relationship from the public transport operators to these station managers to influence in decisions about which services to use. And therefore, APC data that is used from the vehicles and the visitor data that can be gathered also in these stationary places doesn't today has a common place to be matched and analyzed and shared. And I think that this is something that, as Alice again said, is starting. I know there are some tenders in some train stations, but this is not the common thing nowadays. It's not being structured nor organized for everyone. So I think we are in the place that we have to start to think about putting this matching of data in a more organized way.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you're right. I've seen it very recently that this requirement comes up. So, and I mean, with recently, maybe the past months. What do you think? What benefits can we get out of this shared data, and who can benefit from it?
Well, first of all, as a principle, I think that data allows people to take good decisions for the future. But not only that, it also, if you have the chance to have real-time data, accurate data, you can even have a better and timely decision when an unforeseen event happened. We don't have to mention last year how this change with the pandemic world created new needs and new types of people moving in the daily basis. And I think that if you're able to have in place a system that allows you to have the data of how people or how these behaviors are changing, you can act much faster. And again, as I mentioned before, so we have different worlds. The public sectors, the private companies, they are sharing the same user. So we're not only talking about a passenger in a public transport or a visitor in a retail or shopping center. Well, we're talking about a citizen. And if they put the focus on that citizen and being able to identify their needs and to then give the answers to those needs with all the data that they gather, I think only both parts can win. If you start with that willingness to having a common collaboration, a conversation in order to provide a better experience to that citizens, to the user, you can have and escalate even higher projects that goes to in benefit for the citizens.
Mm-hmm. I could imagine this, Alice, if you're listening to Romina's idea on the shared data. Could you also think of some use for your project, if there is any value in it?
Yeah, I completely agree, first of all. And also I like what she just said about counting the visitor, I mean, not the visitor, but like considering people as citizens and not like visitors of a shop or users of a train. That would be very important. But yes, the problem again is that the station has its data, then the train operator has data, the shops that have their data, and then, it's not really connected. So yes, sure, if we would know which is the journey, and the entire journey of the inhabitants and users of this public transport and stations will know better what they need and what we can offer. So of course would be very helpful to have this data for the projects I'm working on and in general, and then the connection with the city, let's say, is to gather also the data from urban planners, for example, about the surrounding areas. So all the services and shops and facilities around the station for the entire journey, commuting, and what the people, where they go when they leave the station and they go home, and or they go to work, or they go to a shop or another service, I don't know. So yes, that would be very interesting and very important to have this, let's say, jointly data for the projects. Yeah.
So if we are already dreaming of some shared data, I would also raise the question to both of you. If we see how the train stations have changed during the past years, what differences can you foresee, both of you, in urban mobility for that, or what dreams would you have on that for the future?
Yes, if we imagine this, I would see a city without cars, less cars, where people can rely on the public transport, the other micro-mobility and sharing mobility solutions, and also having what they need in terms of services when they do their commuting, so they don't need the car, to go then to the commercial mall close to their home, So that's the city I would imagine, and more comfortable for people, and without all the cars parked into the city, because they are occupying public space that can be freed up for other activities, more, I don't know, social, economic, other kind of activities. And of course, seeing stations becoming real mobility and service hubs, accessible to everyone, and really designed to serve people and communities, but also to help on the transition to smart and sustainable cities, so using these energies and recycling wastes. And this is the other part I would like to see one day.
Yeah, step by step, but it's already starting.
Yeah, exactly.
Romina, do you have any ideas on that?
Yes, and I will be very redundant again on this idea of being able to get to know the user, because I think that, well, in this case, train stations are part of our daily life, of our routine. And do they have all the information for us in order to use these spaces in a safe, in a very comfortable way? I don't know, tomorrow if I have, an accident or break my leg, will I be able to use the train station in the same way? Will they have the facilities in order for me to have the same type of movement in within? If tomorrow I have a child and I have a trolley, will it be with the conditions in order for me to be comfortably moving from one place to another with the trolley? That's what I expect for the train station. And yes, it sounds like a dream, or we could imagine about it, but I can only also think about one real project that I know only the basic information because I'm not working on that, hopefully in the future, but it is a station called Estación Vialia in Vigo, in the north of Spain. So basically they are a multimodal bus and train station and shopping center and a leisure park. So it is a fact and is a proof that when you combine public transport authorities, cities, and private entities, you are able to develop a great project that it's able to attend all the citizen needs. So it doesn't matter if the person is using that space only from going from home to work, if they go in there only to shop something, if they're going there only to meet their friends at the skate park. It doesn't matter. It is a project that works very well. Even after the inauguration, even post-pandemic times, they got over 1 million of visitors, and it gave life back to that area of the city. It also imposed a lot of economical aspects and also created a lot of workstations. So here I live again, we should be able to have these spaces to work all together with different entities, with different objectives. But if we center in the user and if we really look for making the good use of the data, we can be all very successful in these projects. And as a user, I hope I can make the best use out of it.
Yes, totally. As a user, we all wish for we can all wish for things and give our feedback. And but here in the audience, there might be, or there are some stakeholders who can really make an impact. And I think it was very valuable to get your insights on that. We have one question from the audience that I would like to raise, which I would read for you. So on the one hand, we need more people to use trains when they travel or commute if you want to achieve sustainable mobility goals. On the other hand, there is an increased need for space. So what you were saying, Alice, for distance from other passengers in times of COVID. No, I didn't say that, sorry. But there's on the one hand we want to travel, and on the other hand we need some space. So how can we deal with that? Are there any concepts? Are there any cities you already work with, Alice? Is there any example that you already can give today?
That's a very tricky one, no? Because of course the space is limited and the population is rising, so we need to adapt ourselves more. And but then, of course, stations, spaces, trains will be adapted. But in any case, it's better to have, to adapt facilities instead of multiplying the number of cars, because one day it will be, too much. So no, that's an issue that I think is not. I mean, in Europe, there are a lot of companies. They are refurbishing stations and enlarging their spaces, but I don't think. Of course, they adapt, to the number of people we have now, or in 5 years, 10 years, but not in 50 years. So that's not easy question.
Yeah, I would think so too. But it probably depends also on the project. You can see it project by project and then find individual solutions for that.
But then, of course, if you optimize, the optimization of things can lead to the use of more space. As I said before, we can free up the spaces in city from the cars. So we can then implement other services or other spaces for citizens, and also this optimization of energy and flows instead of having, the production of energy located in other sites. You can do it in the same infrastructure and optimize also square meters, for this. Yep. That's the idea, optimization.
Yes, true. So thank you, Alice. Thank you, Mina, for this very interesting talk. Thank you also to our viewers today. You can still raise your questions if you still have some, either on our LinkedIn page, in the chat, or if you write an email to webinar@dilax.com. This has been the last DILAX Lab session for this year. We are already coming close to the end of the year, and we thank you all for joining this format so often, and we are very grateful that it has had a very good success so far. So we will continue with the sessions next year, and until then I wish you a very good holiday season and a very good end of the year. Thank you very much.